All right, my friends, it is Tuesday, 28 January 2025, and these are three big stories. Now, we're going to talk mostly about the Russian economy, and we're going to get to that in just a moment. But we're going to start with something that was about this time last year, started to be a thing again, and that was the Polish farmers blocking Ukraine's borders. Now, this is February of 2024, but before it becomes a thing again, they're trying to fix it. So the EU is considering not renewing its preferential trade regime with Ukraine after June of 2025. While a new, deep, and comprehensive free trade area agreement is under discussion, it may include agricultural quotas and safeguards with less trade support for Ukraine. So I'm not sure exactly if that's going to work in their interest or what exactly, but we all know that this kind of thing wasn't working. So they have to work something out, and better to do it proactively. Poland has taken steps to prevent border blockades with Ukraine. This is recent. The Polish government has added border checkpoints to the list of critical infrastructure to reduce the risk of future disruptions on the Poland-Ukraine border. So they got to get it sorted out. And while you want to help Ukraine, you also, I understand what the Polish farmers are feeling frustrated about, but that's not the best way it's better to work it out ahead of time legislatively. Okay, so the big conversation here is about the Russian economy. And I don't want to be hyperbolic and say the economy is going to fall apart tomorrow, because it's not. But it's kind of like the analogy that I would give is the economy collapsing would be like a prize fighter. He's in the ring and he gets bludgeoned. And we know that the economy is getting bludgeoned, right? How many punches does it take before he actually falls over? And we don't know if we're at, punch number 98 out of 99, and you just need to get to 99 punches in order to fall over, or if we're at punch number 47 before that happens. We just don't know. But the signs are very, very bad for the Russian economy. There's no doubt about that. So while I want to avoid being hyperbolic, it is bad. Okay. There's no metric on which the Russian economy isn't collapsing. Well, that's a little bit much for Jay to say that. Jay in Kyiv saying this. Steel production in December 2024 compared to December of 2023 is down 8.6%. Like, compare that against Germany, that's up 4.1% or whatever. Like, it's interesting that steel production is down. Now, it's all tied together. Like, if something's happening, say with the interest rate, that's going to be affecting this sector and that sector and the other sector. And then the people being mobilized are going to affect competition in the job market. And that's going to affect, right? It's all going to be tied together. Okay. So International Banking Group, ING, has finalized a deal to exit Russia. Well, it only took them 3 years. So selling Russian business to Global Development JSC. Now they're going to take a $0.7 billion or 7 billion euro loss. So not quite a billion loss. I don't feel bad for ING. You should have gotten out a long time ago. Now, the real interesting thing to me is, now once they leave and it's sold to Global Development JSC, I don't know who they are, but I'm pretty sure ING would have managed it better than what Global Development JSC is going to manage it as. So it'll probably be less efficient and worse for the economy, but ING should have gotten out a long time ago. Okay, Anton Gershchenko had a number of issues about the economy. Several pieces of news about the Russian economy from the recent days. Each of them doesn't necessarily mean anything by itself, but together they paint a picture, in my opinion. So the Russian economy is not in a good state. The important task is to further weaken Russia by sanctions. That's true. That is an important task. Russian state-owned sanctioned VTB Bank has closed its service of money transfers from Turkish liras after about a week of operations. Okay, in and of itself, that's not really a whole lot. Now, this is a lot more. A record number of shadow capital has left Russia in 2024. About 9.6 billion were removed from Russia, according to the central bank. That's pretty big. And then production of industrial metals has decreased sharply in Russia. Two of Russia's largest metallurgic companies had to decrease production in 2024. But why did they have to do it? Due to being able to or unable to sell it either locally or abroad. So now, Nornickel is not sanctioned completely, so there's actually some room to actually take it down even further. After the start of the full-scale invasion, over 50% of their sales were to China. Demand for steel inside Russia has also decreased. There's less construction due to a high interest rate, and oil companies are also buying less pipes. And so that's what I mean by it's all interconnected. Serial production of MS-21 passenger aircraft have been delayed again. This time, it's supposed to start in 2026, but the prime minister swore that it was going to start in 2025. So the Russian aviation industry will not receive new planes instead of the Western ones that are going out of order in large numbers because they can't maintain them. Okay, Kremny EL, one of the largest microelectronics plants in Russia, stopped its operations after being attacked by Ukrainian drones. Technological production chains were disrupted, they said. That's how they describe being attacked by drones. Technological production chains were disrupted, Russian media said to explain the situation. On January 23rd, right before the attack, local media reported that the plant was completely restored from the previous drone attack back in October of 2024. So again, disruption after disruption after disruption. Russian business expects that inflation in Russia will exceed 10% this year. Of course, it's going to exceed 10%. A blind man can see that. A survey showed despite what authorities promise. Earlier, inflation in Russia was controlled by the increase of the key rate, but last year, the rate was not increased, which sped up in the inflation. So you can either have the interest rate, like if you put the interest rate up, you can slow down inflation. But if they refuse to put it up, now if they do put it up, then it creates a whole different problems, cascade of problems within the economy. And if they don't, it creates another spiral of inflationary problems. Russian central bank still promised to return inflation figures to 4%, but no earlier than 2026. A lot of damage can be done to the economy in that amount of time. By numerous reports, real inflation in Russia might have exceeded 20% in 2024. About that. And I think that's a fair estimate. Okay, the tsunami of bankruptcies is crashing down on Russia. This is according to the Kyiv Post. According to a Kremlin-linked analytical center headed by the brother of Defense Minister Belyusov. Okay, so it's not like it's Ukraine putting out this information. 1 in 5 manufacturers, coal companies, hundreds of shopping malls, transportation firms, airlines, IT companies face a threat of bankruptcy. 20% face a potential bankruptcy, and it's because the business environment is so bleak because you have so many people being pulled off the service and you have simultaneously this high interest and all kinds of other factors that are making it terrible. Like this. Russia's oil trade to China and India has stalled as new U.S. sanctions drive up tanker shipping costs. Now, those new sanctions came at the very tail end of the Biden administration, but they're effective. It turns out, okay. March Russian crude offers jumped $3 to $5 per barrel. Now, if you're trying to undercut the market, and you're trying to stay like under 60 or whatever it is, and then it has to go up by 3 to 5, that makes it less appealing to have to do it this way. And hold on, it gets worse. Let's look at this. More nails in the coffin for Putin's war machine as Kazakhstan ramps up oil production a stunning 10%. How about that? So what's that going to do? That's going to drive the cost of oil down, like generally speaking. Now, again, Kazakhstan's million barrels a day is going to have an impact, but it's not going to overall change the scene. But you add things up, what Kazakhstan does here or what someone else does there, or drill baby drill in the US or whatever, it's going to add up. So Ben Hodges concludes Russia is more fragile now than many comprehend. Their industry, economy, and oil and gas infrastructure are fragile, vulnerable. We should be putting maximum pressure on all of that, including sanctions on India and China for continuing to buy Russian oil. I think that's fair. We just don't want to do it. We should be doing that sort of thing, though. Okay, now what happens if they win? See, this is why. So I was talking about okay, Putin's economy is beat up, but there's a reason why he's willing to take the beating, and that's this. Russia wins if it gets to keep Ukrainian land worth $12.4 trillion in natural resources. The cost of the war to Russia, just $1 trillion. So if you're just looking at that kind of calculus, $250 billion in official spending, $225 billion in loans to the defense sector, $400 billion in frozen reserves, the $130 billion in war spending, and then, whatever the cost of lives are, but we're really not factoring that in. If you look at that cost calculation, they're thinking this is worth the risk. Okay, now, Putin compared World War II and Russia's special military operation just the other day to Russian soldiers who are defending their native land, defending our interest and the security of Russia. Ukraine is not your native land. Ukraine's not your native land any more than the Mediterranean coast in Palestine is Italy's because it was formerly Rome. But that's the way that Putin's seeing things. And that's the danger here. And we got to get away from this idea that Putin is going to see the world through the lens of the former large size of either the Soviet or former Russian lands. Okay, Zelensky shared his insights in an interview with Italian journalists and key issues. Zelensky expressed regrets over Ukraine's decision to relinquish its nuclear weapons without receiving proper security guarantees. They thought they had guarantees. What they had were assurances, which turned out not to be real guarantees. And morally, we are still obligated, in my estimation. Zelensky lamented the inability to determine the true scale of losses in Mariupol. He highlighted the deportation of almost 20,000 Ukrainian children by Russian forces that we know of, and there's certainly more than that. And Zelensky criticized the lack of decisive action from Ukraine's leadership and Western nations during earlier stages of the Russian aggression, calling the Minsk agreements treasonous. So saying like, look, we should have done things earlier. The world should have been awake earlier. But speaking of the world being awake, let's look at what's going on in the West, particularly with Trump. Now, I'm going to try to translate some things from Trump. So I think that's probably the best way to approach this is like, here's what he said, but here's why he's saying it. Now, when you approach Trump, you need to think about him a little bit differently. And this is the analogy that I'm going to give you. He's not really thinking about Ukraine first and foremost, and that makes sense. He's the president of the United States. Now, he does think about Ukraine periodically, and sometimes he thinks about it in a good way and sometimes in a bad way. But if you were to take his statements, just general statements, and say, and then try to overlay that and apply it to Ukraine, it doesn't really work that well. It's like saying, going by what I say at work, trying to gauge how much I love my family. Like, I love my family, but I don't talk about them a lot at work. And you can reverse that if you talk about how much what I do at work academically, and you were to try to take that by my statements at home, talking to my family, it wouldn't really translate. Same kind of process here. Okay, Donald Trump's plan for an Iron Dome for the U.S. On Monday, President Trump signed an executive order to begin construction of an air defense system across the United States. The document cites the growing threat of attacks on the country from hypersonic, ballistic, and cruise missiles. We must immediately begin modern missile defense shield, an Iron Dome that can protect Americans. The system, named Iron Dome in the order, is inspired by Israel's defense system. Okay, so he said that here, and I'm going to show you a couple clips from what he said at the same thing. Now, that's not really related to Ukraine in any significant way, but he's thinking because he's seeing what's happened between Russia and Ukraine and going, we'd be in bad shape if we had to have this kind of air defense kind of thing. There's not a lot of places around the United States that probably has that. Now, I just happened to be reading Keir Giles and Who Will Defend Europe, this book here. I was reading it today, and he was talking about like the UK has nothing. The UK can put planes in the air to shoot things down, but that's about all that they can do. So they need to be thinking about this as well. Pretty much the whole world needs to be thinking about this after seeing what has happened, but we're just kind of waking up to it, and it's pretty tragic. Okay, second thing Trump was talking about, the release of DeepSeek AI from a Chinese company should be a wake-up call for all our industries that we need to be laser focused on competing to win. He's talking about competing to win, the U.S. being able to lead in AI and that sort of thing. He's not really, he's not trying to say the Chinese are doing great and attaboy Chinese, we're behind you. He's not saying that at all. But if you misinterpret that, see, they're way ahead of us, like, oh, Trump admires the Chinese. That's not it at all. So you have to understand him in context. Now, Ryan Macbeth was talking about the Chinese and the AI and that sort of thing, and I want you to hear what he had to say about this.
DeepSeek AI, a Chinese AI company, came out a few days ago and freaked everybody out. Now, I am a software engineer and I work for an AI company, and this smells. Now, if it's true, DeepSeek's claim is a big deal because the US banned the sale of certain semiconductor chips to China. intentionally in order to make it harder for Chinese companies to develop AI programs. Now, to keep this at the high level here, when you enter a prompt into AI, you are actually doing a lot of matrix math. And in order to do this, you need tensor cores on chips, like this one, which has 456 of them. So when I hear the DeepSeek AI claim that they made this advanced AI model without any advanced chips, it kind of makes me imagine like a pizza restaurant that says they made a delicious pizza without any yeast. Either they're lying or they made it out of cauliflower. And cauliflower crust isn't pizza. So I think it's possible the model was trained with advanced chips and they just are saying something different. Well, why would they do this? Well, it could be a psychological operation or a psyop. If you can convince people that AI is possible with less advanced chips, then people might be less likely to support Taiwan when China invades. And it's Taiwan that manufactures a lot of these advanced chips. You know, back when the Soviet Union was a thing, there was this term called Potemkin villages. These were villages designed to show outsiders how beautiful the Soviet system was, but there was nothing behind them. These Potemkin villages were just kind of fake villages. So I kind of wonder if DeepSeek is like a Potemkin AI.
Okay, so that's Ryan Macbeth's take on it. Now, I showed you that between the last one and this one to show you this. Jay in Kiev had a comment, Trump joins China in its war on another key American ally, talking about Taiwan. But that's not really, I think, what's happening. And I'm not trying to say bad stuff about Jay in Kiev. I highlight his work all the time. He does a great job. I just think that the analysis is a little off. President Trump announces the U.S. will be placing tariffs on semiconductors and pharmaceuticals imported from Taiwan in the very near future. Why? Because he's trying to drive semiconductor production back onto U.S. soil away from other places. Hear what he has to say.
Particularly in the very near future, we're going to be placing tariffs on foreign production of computer chips, semiconductors, and pharmaceuticals to return production of these essential goods to the United States of America. They left us and they went to Taiwan, which is about 98% of the chip business, by the way. And we want them to come back, and we don't want to give them billions of dollars like this ridiculous program that Biden has. Give everybody billions.
Okay, and you're slapping at Biden and that sort of thing. Okay, but you understand this is not about supporting China. It's about driving domestic production of this. It's not a great idea to slap tariffs on there in order to drive domestic production, but that's what he's trying to do. So you have to translate what he's trying to do in order to make sense of him. Okay, now, this leaves us in a place where we're wondering, well, if Trump's going to do that, is he going to abandon NATO? Finnish President Alex Stubb today said he was confident that the U.S. won't leave NATO. Finnish president is convinced that the United States will not leave NATO during Donald Trump's presidency. He stated that he has not a second of doubt that the U.S. will remain a NATO member. He explained that there's no other alliance. Now, this is why. No other alliance where the U.S. can organize its security and interest in Europe as reliably and cost-effectively as in NATO. I think that's a compelling argument, and that it gives me some comfort. Believe me, this calculation works for the U.S. regardless of how high the contributions of other NATO member states are. Okay, but if you can get your country's percentage of giving to NATO for military, for GDP to military, I think that will go a long way to reassuring you that Trump isn't going anywhere. The head of Poland's Ministry of Defense said that U.S. President Donald Trump will only listen to their opinion on Ukraine when they start making serious investments in their own security. And I think that's also very fair as well. So to the degree that they're doing that, it'll kind of right the ship for NATO, and they can start, bracing against whatever is coming potentially down the pike from Russia, and they can take a little bit of a breath of relief that the Trump administration won't be going anywhere. Okay, last little bit from Darth Putin. A secure international border has Russian soldiers on both sides of it. That's the way they think. All right, my friends, that's all that I have. Thank you for your time. Thank you for listening to me. Tell me what you think about this. Were my translations of Trump legitimate? I'm not saying that you have to like him. That's not the point. But this is the way that I think he's seeing the world. And not everything has to do with either Ukraine or Russia or China. A lot has to do with his own domestic agenda. And I think that's what we're seeing here, and we shouldn't misinterpret it. All right, put that in the comments below. Thank you for the time, the likes, the shares, and the subscribes. And thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.